Mini episode 47 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Outside the Box Score, your home on the web for entertaining sports columns and videos. Follow them on the web at OutsideTheBoxScore.blogspot.com.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
All right, welcome back in the FDH Lounge here. Rick Morris and original dignitary Chris Galloway back in with us here. It's been a while since we've gotten to sit down with Chris, but at the political season in high gear, we're making it happen today. So, Chris, good to have you back in, my friend.
Oh, very glad to be here, Rick. Thank you.
All right. Well, we're going to be talking a lot about the presidential primaries here today and caucus, I guess, as the case may be. You got the caucus that leads it off in Iowa on January 3rd, the New Hampshire primary a week later, and then you start to have some events sporadically over the course of the next couple of weeks. As we're sitting here today putting this together, in the course of the last week, we have seen the polls that have come out where Newt Gingrich looks to have solidified his lead on the Republican side, and you got Mitt Romney in trouble because everybody's been talking about this 25% ceiling. He now looks like he's below that a little bit nationally, so not only has he not moved beyond it, there's been a little bit of slippage. Supposedly, the analysts on TV are saying the top line of the polls here for Gingrich, it looks even better when you go down further into that and you look at the guts of the polling to see how bad it is for Romney in terms of solidifying his support. So you've seen it this week. You've seen the attacks start coming on Gingrich. When you've got John Sununu out there calling somebody not a real conservative, I'm not sure how that makes your case for you, but it's been very interesting. It's an interesting choice of people. What Nelson Rockefeller wasn't available to blast Newt Gingrich's conservative credentials, but it's desperation time. Because I think when we get to the holidays, I think there's going to be a little bit of a freeze out on people paying attention to this. But what's the general shape of the race as you see it right now? We'll start at that point in time with you, Chris. The general shape of the race, New Hampshire, Iowa, and beyond.
Well, I think the big challenge for Newt Gingrich is putting together a national organization on the fly. That's the only way he'll be able to sustain the momentum. We've seen the rise and fall of a lot of candidates come and go. Herman Cain, Rick Perry. A lot of them have been self-inflicted wounds, yes, but at the same time, you have to have a national organization. You have to have an organization in Iowa. You have to have one in New Hampshire and South Carolina and Nevada and on and on and on. Florida. Newt's putting all that together now. And, for example, last week he just opened his headquarters in Iowa. But I would say that although organization is very important in the caucuses in places like Iowa, it's less so in other states. And in today's mediated political realities, you're watching this sort of amorphous mass of Republican voters just sort of shifting and moving around from person to person while they search for someone that fits not only their values but also someone that I'm thinking that they believe can beat President Obama. So I don't know how important organization it is beyond Iowa and, say, New Hampshire. Because then it becomes sort of a money game and fast pace and who can master the media. But Newt's certainly lacking in those two states. I think it's interesting, if you look inside the poll numbers, watch Michelle Bachmann in Iowa. She's sitting at about 13% in Iowa right now, and she has by far a much better organization than Newt does. And I wonder if she can play either some sort of surprise there, finishing first or second, or at least playing some spoiler role, because she will be able to get her base out and get her people out. And I don't know if we know whether or not Newt can do that at this point.
Have you heard about this? This is very interesting. Some of the revelations that have come out since Ed Rollins was working for her. Did you hear the whole deal about the campaign bus that she's got there? They run that thing around the state even when she's not in it. And they try to make it look like she's in the bus.
Wait, why not? You've got to do whatever you've got to do whatever you can. And if people see the bus roll through their little town in Iowa, they think, "Wow, Michelle Bachmann's going somewhere." Listen, Iowa's about organization, and she's got a good one there, and she's gonna run hard there, and she's gonna do some damage there. So I think that when you look inside the numbers and you look at the organization, that's one person to just don't completely discount at this point, especially if Newt falters at some point in the next couple weeks. But I do agree with you. The holidays coming up, it's going to pose a challenge for all the candidates.
Yeah, I mean, the holiday is the best thing that could possibly happen to Newt Gingrich, because it's the old Dean Smith four corners offense. You're freezing the clock, essentially, at a period of time when people need to bring you down. Michelle Bachmann, I want to ask you a theory on this. It's something I've heard. It sounds far-fetched to think that she would think that this is plausible. But when you look at this, she really hasn't attacked Mitt Romney a whole lot. A little bit here and there, glancing blows, a little bit of socialism this and whatever that, but she's going after everybody else. She's going after Rick Perry. Well, not anymore, but she had been. Is she trying to play spoiler for Mitt Romney, and is she delusional enough to think that the hyper-cautious Mitt Romney would pick her for VP? That sounds way.
I wouldn't buy into that theory. I think more likely than not, she's going after the people that are sitting over on the right side of the party with her. It's sort of like this. They've had this strategy of Romney and then who, and so it's almost like you've got this steel cage death match going on. Within the ring off to the side, and it's whoever can get out of that match is going to be able to be the conservative and come out. I think that's why she's attacked Perry, she attacked Pawlenty, she's attacking Newt. With the predominance of her attacks is because she wants to be the Tea Party / right wing candidate to emerge. And with her organization in Iowa, I don't think you can completely discount that at this point.
No, and she won the straw poll after all. I mean, we tend to forget that just because of this very wild, almost unprecedented autumn that we've had here. I don't know that in a presidential cycle we've really seen people rising and falling with this kind of breathtaking regularity. But yeah, you go back to August, she was the queen bee at that time. She'd won the Iowa straw poll, but even that day, a little bit of her thunder was getting sucked out of the air there as Rick Perry was getting into the race. Now, you look at a situation here in terms of who's got the money to compete going forward and who has the ability to raise the money, albeit it's been compromised by his performance thus far. Again, cards on the table, that all things being equal at this point, I would vote for Rick Perry as somebody that I think could actually win this thing under certain circumstances. So maybe I'm a little bit biased here, but again, how plausible do you think things are with him? With a strong finish in Iowa, New Hampshire doesn't look like very friendly terrain, although his chief strategist Dave Carney has deep roots there, so you never know if he's got the momentum coming out of Iowa. As far as somebody from within who's got a chance to step up, because I think the dream of a white knight coming in from the outside has probably come and gone. If somebody's going to emerge in a post-Gingrich, post-Romney vacuum, do you see any upside for Perry?
Yeah, he definitely has an opportunity. Again, organization within Iowa will allow him to move out of Iowa. I think he should pretty much write off New Hampshire if I was him. But I would then, if I was Perry, I would try to, he's got to finish first or second in Iowa and pivot immediately into South Carolina. And the reason for that is obviously if somehow Gingrich does win Iowa, for Perry, he has to finish second somehow. So that he can go straight to South Carolina, because Newt will go to New Hampshire to contest that against Romney, and that could give Perry a leg up in trying to woo South Carolina voters. Because if Newt loses then in New Hampshire, which has historically been the better predictor of nominees, then Perry can do some damage there and possibly cut Newt's legs out. The way this plays out is that there's a lot of these candidates have strengths in different places, and we could see a drawn out primary season where no one has the actual national organization resources to get on a big roll. That still could play out that way with the ups and downs that we've seen. Newt has a lot of warts, and then I think the biggest one against him is that I think that at some point Republican voters may have to stop and say, is this guy electable? Can this guy beat Barack Obama in November of 2012? Or are independent voters, Reagan Democrats, moderate Republicans going to wake up one day and go, wait a minute, we remember why we hated this guy in 1997 and 1996, so why the hell would we want to make him president now? So far he's been sort of Teflon, and he's been able to avoid that in his rise. But I think those questions are going to start to get into voters' minds, and that, at the end of the day, that could still be Romney's salvation, or it could allow for yet another person to rise up, from the ashes and take hold of this race.
Well, and that's a very good point there on Gingrich. I mean, I had nicknamed him back in the late 90s there, Newt King Squish, because it's one of those things where, and this is one of the suicidal things about Republican politics, it's a thing where the more you position yourself, it seems like a lot of the time, the less you can deliver on. I mean, this is a guy who got his lunch handed to him by Bill Clinton in those negotiations in the late 90s. And yet he came off as an extremist. Is there a worst of both worlds than getting beaten by the Democrats and also coming off as an extremist who's out of the mainstream? That's the worst daily double I can think of.
No, that's pretty bad. And, I think it's also telling when you've got guys like Senator Colburn and, Joe Scarborough. I mean, they ask Colburn, I served with Newt, I know Newt, and I'm not voting for Newt. I mean, I think it's telling when people that know him best don't want anything to do with him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, whether it's a candidate or, say, someone in business, whenever I meet somebody like that, the people that know him best like him the least, that's always a good sign to run away.
Right.
And that really seems to be Newt Gingrich. Those who know him best like him least. And so I think that at some point, Republican voters, there's always this flirtation with the most conservative candidate, and there's we always have this sense that Republicans will just drive off the cliff with all flags flying, and maybe that'll happen this time. But more times than not, Republican voters come to their senses and will choose the person who is the most electable in a general election, more times than not. And so that's really what is working against Newt at this time, I think.
Well, there's something that's working for him, though, and this is something where I might, for a rare chance here, give the Republican primary electorate a break, because I think even if they're a little bit misguided in how they're looking at it, at least maybe they're motivated by the right thing, and that being his talk of these Lincoln-Douglas debates and how he wants to take it to Obama as far as debates go. I think there's a little bit of a creeping realization in the Republican primary electorate that ever since you go back to the archetype of Ronald Reagan, plain-spoken, regular guy, they've really gone off the cliff with embracing anti-intellectualism, I think, as manifested perfectly by George W. Bush in the last decade here. Republicans have been underdogs in presidential debates probably most of the time you and I have been alive. You have a guy who, at the very least, he's erratic, he's this, he's whatever. I don't trust him on a lot of stuff, but he's a towering intellect. And I think that Republicans are drawn to that, saying this may be the kind of guy who at least won't get his lunch handed to him by Obama in a debate, at least when you start talking policy.
I think there was a quote that I saw, it was on Twitter, and I can't remember who said it, but and I would give credit if I could, but the basic gist of the quote is that Newt Gingrich is what a smart person looks like to an ignorant person, and Newt is a smart guy, and I agree with you. I don't understand the Republican Party's sort of anti-intellectual, anti-intelligence, anti-science sort of bent that we've gotten on in the last decade.
Fetishizing.
Yeah, I don't get it. I don't. It's not my party. And I don't understand where that comes from. But I think then doing a complete 180 and embracing some pseudo intellectual from Georgia, who's been all over the map on issues, frankly, doesn't is sort of like going the other extreme now.
Right.
Okay, we got rid of a guy that we didn't think could spell potato, but now we want to go to a guy who is going to teach a class on potatoes. Really? I mean, isn't there a happy medium? I think there are smart guys in this race. I mean, I look at a guy like John Huntsman. He's very accomplished. He's very well spoken. He's articulate. He's intelligent. And I don't understand how, to me, that's the kind of candidate we should be more embracing, is someone who's intelligent, has a lot of great real-world experience, and hasn't flip-flopped on a bunch of issues. And the interesting thing will be when Newt has the debate with Huntsman, that will be an opportunity to see Newt up against somebody other than what I would consider a complete lightweight like Kane. And it would also give Huntsman an opportunity for people to see him in action. If people are looking for an alternative to Newt, this could be the opening for Huntsman in that Lincoln Douglas style debate to really, with a strong performance, his campaign could be the next one to rise.
That would be very interesting, and I agree with you. There's a lot that's appealing about Huntsman's record, and again, I think he and his people have done a better job of highlighting that recently, and not trying to be the John McCain circa 2000 as they seem to be positioning themselves early on. Going to his record, that does seem to be his strong points. And
don't you think it's interesting, though? You had Kane, he was in trouble. Newt and he had the debate. Kane starts to really collapse after that, and who benefited? Newt.
Yeah.
They were on stage together. It was televised. People watched it. And, as Kane collapsed, where did Kane's support go? It went to the other guy on that table.
Yeah.
So, that could work for Huntsman as well. If he's strong in that debate and people find him affable and intelligent and Newt starts to flounder and the baggage on Newt continues to pile up, people may look back and go, well, that was that Huntsman guy I saw on stage with Newt, and he was pretty funny, and he was kind of intelligent, and I liked what he had to say. He could get a bounce out of that if Newt falters.
Well, let me ask you about another thing here, too. A good buddy of one of our favorite lounge regulars here, former Congressman Joe Diaguardi from New York, his good pal, Ron Paul. What extent do you think, again, I think he's not going to get the Republican nomination. The support in the party is not fervent enough, but I'm hearing a lot of talk now that he may finish strongly enough in Iowa. He's doing well enough, maybe a little bit under the radar. Maybe he's a guy that takes out Newt or seriously wounds him. To what extent do you think, and certainly his initial ad run on Newt Gingrich was very devastating, to what extent can Ron Paul, through his own strength, help take down somebody else, one or two other people?
Well, Ron Paul, as always, can play spoiler because he appeals to a certain segment of the party that might otherwise be inclined, with no other choice, to go to somebody like Newt or a Perry. And so Ron Paul is always in the position of playing spoiler. In some ways, his supporters may come to realize that he ends up, giving the Republicans the nominee that they absolutely do not want in a guy like Mitt Romney, because that they slice and dice up the Republican right. That said, Ron Paul's not going to be president, and I think the other question about him is whether or not he'd be willing to jump off the Republican bandwagon and run as a libertarian or as a third party candidate next cycle. And I think that to me, that's the one thing that no one's really talking about yet, is we're all focused on the Republican primary and how that may play out. In some ways, though, we've got to start putting an eye on the general election, because depending on who gets nominated in the Republican Party and how the party either does or doesn't coalesce around that nominee, I think this year, for the first time in a long time, we have the real possibility of having a Democrat, a Republican, and maybe one or two or possibly three strong independent candidates with a segment of either geographical or demographic support out there. I would not be surprised if you had two strong independent candidacies this fall.
I have heard Chuck Todd say that on the Daily Rundown on MSNBC. He thinks that's a possibility. Mike Bloomberg's name gets thrown out there a lot. Certainly he's enough of a megalomaniac to look in the mirror and see a future commander-in-chief, and that would be somebody I would think that would take more support probably from Obama naturally. But when you look at it, yeah, I think he's right about that, and the odds of a Ross Perot-type candidacy this year, I've always said this, that I'm amazed by what Ross Perot was able to do. First of all, before it emerged just how over the edge he was mentally, but no internet. I mean, this is a guy who, it was 800 numbers, it was whatever. There wasn't even really the modern tools of today.
His 30-minute commercials with a bunch of pie charts and whatnot.
What could be more low-tech relative to today than that, 20 years ago? So, yeah, you look at the tools that are out there. I mean, even Donald Trump. I mean, Trump is toying with possibly getting on as an independent in the fall. I think he might very well do that if it was Romney. I don't know if he would do that.
That's what we need. Clown for president. Listen. I think the point you've almost hit when you talk about Perot 20 years ago in the technology is that think about 20 years ago and what the electorate in the country was like.
Yep.
We were prosperous. We were stable. Yeah, we had a 6-month recession that was very shallow and weak in there that allowed Bill Clinton to get elected.
I graduated in that job market, though.
Well,
it was not a great time.
No, it wasn't, but it wasn't today.
Right.
I mean, I think the country is much more divided. The world is much more chaotic. The economy is much more shaky. It's worse. You have the Tea Party, you have the Occupy Wall Street, which in many ways those are two different movements, both screaming about the same thing, just on different sides of the coin.
Exactly.
So
right.
I think the country itself is in a much more volatile position than ever it was for a guy like Ross Perot to go out and get 18-19% of the vote in '92, and so I think that there's a real opportunity and a real possibility for independent candidates to sprout up and see somebody with 12% of the vote, somebody else with 18% of the vote, depending on their strength and their resources. And I think that I wouldn't discount that. And as more time goes by and there's chaos within the Republican ranks, I think it's more and more likely.
Let me ask you this. I wonder if there's any reassessment coming on your part. When you, me, and our good friend Scott Pullins from the Pullins Group did our end-of-the-decade politics reassessment here, when I was talking about down the line a new third party emerging or a permanent independent wave or anything, at that time you didn't really think it was going to be, at least for the next decade, something that would really be on the table now. Are you sort of turning on that based on how bad the last 2 years have been and the deteriorating conditions, or do you still think that whatever happens, if it happens, would just be sort of a blip in the pond?
I think we're in a volatile period in American politics. I mean, I thought that, a year ago. The only thing I would say is that I don't see the two-party system eroding that fast. Now, that said, with technology, with an electorate that's all over the place, I think the likelihood of a national party collapse or being usurped is more likely. I still think we're at least a decade away from that. I mean, if you look at American history, it's happened. I mean, we typically are a two-party country, have been always, and the two parties that exist today are not the two parties that we had when George Washington, after his presidency, when John Adams got elected. And so there's been this change and this morph, and the Whigs rise and the Whigs fell, and you've got Democratic Republicans, and so I think that it'll happen again. Which party collapses? I don't know which one gets replaced. I mean, eventually I think they both will probably be replaced in some concept. But, we're decades away from that, I still think, at this point.
Okay, well, let me bring this all around on since we're talking history and the sweep of history here, and get your thoughts looking ahead to next year, because there is something that I read a couple of weeks ago that did kind of put a weird thought in my mind. It was, I believe it was New York Magazine, when they were talking about Occupy Wall Street and the way that they're going to be gearing up again next year, and the way that things are going, and in terms of the comparisons to 1968, as far as the escalation of a protest movement. Certainly, if anything happens in Europe with the collapse of the euro, what that could do to the global markets worldwide, that could just fuel things and make the discontent in this country even worse. So in a year that has the potential to be a really volatile year like 1968, in other words, much worse than what we've seen even thus far, I see Newt Gingrich running for president, and I'm sitting here and I'm going, what did Nixon do in '68? I'm the new Nixon. I'm the new Nixon. I'm a guy who's better than I was before. I've learned from before. Newt's trying to portray himself as being a little bit chastened by things here. He does seem to be at least trying to portray at least his version of humility. So do you see any kind of a parallel to, like, I'm the man coming out of the wilderness, I've learned my lessons, I'm better, stronger, wiser?
Yeah, I think that's clearly what he's trying to do. Mm-hmm. I just don't think that he's going to be able to pull it off. I mean, I don't think in an era of YouTube and in cable TV, where people are going to remember all. Again, when other people were able to reinvent themselves when Nixon was able to reinvent himself, he didn't have the internet.
Right.
You weren't always reminded about every stupid thing he ever said.
You won't have Nixon to kick around anymore.
You're not going to remember all the dumb things he did. You won't have people blogging constantly about his terrible record, and that's the problem. And it's harder and harder and harder to reinvent yourself in today's America, in this world today. You are, to take Denny Green, he is who he thought he was, and he can try to reinvent, but when you listen to him speak, when you watch the ego, when you look at the pseudo-intellectualism, the guy, it's the same guy. It's the same guy, and anybody who thinks otherwise is, I think, listen, I'll make you the steak dinner bet right now.
Okay.
Whether he wins the nomination or whatnot, I guarantee you Newt Gingrich will not be president come January of 2013.
Okay. Well, all right, since we're making predictions, I mean, I'm less certain of that. I think it would be a toss-up. But I'll say the same thing on the other side. And again, maybe I'm blinded by my extreme personal animus. Mitt Romney, who's supposed to be the safe choice, no way, because there's a lot of people like me out there that say no way, no how, untrustworthy, greasy guy. How putting up a greasy politics as usual guy in this climate when people hate politicians, how that's the safe choice? That goes way over my head, man. I don't get that. But anyways, I say he's a complete loser if he gets nominated. What say you?
I agree. I don't think Mitt Romney is a slam dunk for the Republicans. I don't think that he is a guy who would win easily. Could he win? I could see a scenario under which he could win. Do I think that if he was nominated, what would I put the odds at? No, I wouldn't put it at even money because he has a lot of baggage. He is the 1%. The other side will be ruthless in pointing out to people about the companies that he took over, tore down, the jobs lost. And in a tough economy, when you're a guy who's like, yeah, I'm a successful businessman, and oh, by the way, hey, look at the economic carnage that Mitt Romney wrought so that he could line his pockets with millions of dollars. That's not going to play so well on Main Street.
Right. And
add in the fact that he basically invented Obamacare.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I don't think that he's a safe choice. Now, will a lot of independent voters and I think female voters probably be attracted to Mitt Romney's candidacy? Yes, and I think that's where Newt Gingrich is Goldwater 2.0 for the Republicans, in that independents and women are not going to be attracted to Newt Gingrich's candidacy.
It's going to be uphill there. All right, last thing to throw out here: possible vice presidential names. I'll say, for example, I think if Rick Perry somehow gets back into it and gets it, I think Bobby Jindal probably gets the nod. But what are some names? I mean, there's some obvious ones out there, guys that didn't run but could be willing to do the next best thing, VP, whether it be John Thune, Mitch Daniels, et cetera. Chris Christie is trying desperately and slobberingly to get the spot for Mitt Romney. So what are some names that you see out there?
Well, I think obviously Rubio is another one. Obviously Florida, Hispanic, that's going to be powerful. I think Ohio's own Rob Portman is a guy that a lot of people he'll be on everybody's short list. I mean, it doesn't matter whoever the nominee is. I mean, Rob Portman will be one of the 5 on that short list that will be reviewed.
It didn't stop him from getting elected senator, but Bush trade rep, does that play well nationally?
I don't think it matters.
Okay.
I think when people get to see Rob Portman and who he is, he plays well. And, we see it in Ohio. I mean, he is very popular right now. I mean, we have an unpopular governor. Congress is not very popular. But Rob Portman is very popular. I mean, and that's across the spectrum.
Yeah.
And, I think the thing about Rob Portman, what makes him strong is, foreign policy experience, budget experience, national experience. He could help carry Ohio probably in a heartbeat for whoever the nominee is. And, lastly, let's be honest, Rob Portman is kind of in some ways the opposite of Joe Biden in that, the best way to describe Rob Portman is statesman.
Yeah.
And, he would bring a lot to the table, and he'll be on anybody's short list.
Interesting. Okay. All right. We'll have to see how this plays out. in this presidential cycle here. We'll be talking again as we get a little bit further on. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you.
All right.